Well, let me give you a bit of the backstory first. There were two big trends that we always knew were going to hit this decade. The first is deglobalization. The Cold War era is over. The post-Cold War era of open borders is over. And it's just a question of how quickly do countries start falling back into their own when it comes to manufacturing and supply chains. This was well advanced before anyone had even heard about coronavirus as a public health threat.
Right.
And then the second one is demography. The global population has been aging at an ever accelerating rate. Most countries crossed through the point of no return back in the 90s, and the few that have not did so in the last 10 years. And we're now nearing a point where many of the advanced countries are going to have more people who are retired than who are mature workers, than who are young workers, than who are children. It's an inverted demographic pyramid. And even in the developing world, they're actually aging faster now. So we've always known that these two trends were going to crest and crush the economic system as we understand it this decade. What coronavirus has done is it's sped everything up. By breaking supply chains, by giving countries a health reason and a populist reason to accelerate these shifts. We're seeing countries like the United States going through the fastest industrialization in their history as they try to cope with these issues. And so instead of it being an open question of whether the demographic and the deglobalization trends would hit us in the first or the second half of the decade, it's all hitting right now. And by the time we get to the end of next year, we're going to be dealing with simultaneous supply chain, labor, and financial crises interwoven, and it's going to be difficult to pick apart what it is that matters more to you. All of that, of course, impacts real estate, not all in a bad way, but certainly we are in for the next 24 months are going to be the greatest period of change that we have seen at least since the Second World War. So many thoughts. Okay. I'd say that there's three big issues going on in real estate right now, writ large, kind of layered one step below those major trends. Number one, the baby boomers are retiring. They don't want to live somewhere where they have to shovel snow. Number two, the millennials, the oldest of whom are now entering their 40s, are discovering that you can't raise kids in a major urban area's inner city. It's certainly not in Midtown. And then third, because of COVID, no one wants to have to commute. So what we're seeing is a relocation of a lot of the professional class, especially millennials, especially boomers, away from the dense urban enclaves on the coasts, plus Chicago, and into places in the interior or in the south, the west, or the southwest. As they're getting away from the cold, they're getting away from high property prices, and they're getting away from metro-centric transport systems. And so if you're in a crescent from roughly Boise and Salt Lake City in the Northwest down through Phoenix and Texas and all the way up into Hampton Roads, you're kind of in the magic zone for areas that are benefiting from these three interlinking trends. And if you overlay that with some of the broader stuff that's happening internationally, it neatly lines up, just coincidentally, because the Mountain West, the Southwest, and the South are also the areas that are benefiting the most from the Mexico impulse. They're benefiting the most from the deglobalization impulse. They're reindustrializing and moving up and down value-added supply chains most rapidly because they have more green space that can be processed for industrial use. And if you add this in with not just population growth, but affluent population growth, these are the parts of the country that are going to see the most rabid economic growth for at least the next couple of decades, probably more. I'm not going to say New England is screwed because there's no part of the United States that is screwed. But if you want to talk about a part of the country that faces challenges moving forward, demographically speaking, it is already the most aged population we have. It is the most rapidly aging portion. And until roughly the year 2000, it was also the part of the country that could rely on a lot of mid and low and high skilled labor from the old world to the new. New York City, Boston, DC, these were the gateway communities for European migrants. Well, back in 2000, that more or less stopped. And so they're still getting in migration, but it's been a long time since New York was the most internationalized city in the country. San Francisco is more internationalized, Los Angeles is, and Houston has the #1 spot. New York doesn't think of it that way, but that's how it's been for some time. And so you've got a population that is honestly teetering on the edge of a major mass retirement because you've got the greatest concentration of boomers in the country in the Northeast, and on average, the boomers will be retired next year. Now, They are not prepared for what this is going to do to their tax system, to their healthcare system, to their infrastructure. Because if you take people who are 63, they're at the height of their earning potential. They're at the height of their tax paying potential. But if you fast forward to 66, they're now no longer tax providers, they're tax takers.
Right.
And that is going to hit the Northeast writ large like a freight train. And it's not like boomers might go back. You never get younger, you only get older. And because there isn't a replacement generation coming up from below, and because the millennials who moved to the Northeast to have that urban experience are now moving out, you're seeing a serious hollowing out. And in that environment of insufficient infrastructure and ever tighter labor markets, you're never going to see a manufacturing renaissance in this area. Now, that doesn't mean this area is doomed. It's very high value. This is where MIT is and Harvard. You know, these are places that are hugely value added and have associated industries with them. Biomedical, design, this is real stuff.
A lot of big brands.
Yes, but they're not going to benefit from the secular trends that are going to benefit most of the rest of the country. Doesn't make it a disaster zone, but it means it's not a growth story. I don't have too much to say about that. I mean, the broader Chesapeake Bay is obviously where America started. I mean, that's the original American story. A couple thoughts, though. Number one, no matter what happens with the baby boomer retirement, it means we're going to have a larger government footprint in the economy just because there are going to be more and more people, 75 million boomers, that are now going to be on the government dime. There is no way that that can happen without a significant build out of government activity in the greater DC area. So this is an area that needs to do a little retooling, but it's a retooling based upon ever higher government outlays. That is something that the city is well designed for. You move outside DC, and there's some concerns. This is an area that has not, in my opinion, proven very good at adapting policies to changes in the overall macroeconomic environment. They dealt very badly with globalization, and I don't anticipate they're going to do very well with deglobalization either. So you can have pockets that are success stories. The Navy's in the process of retooling everything it has, so the shipyards on the Chesapeake should do fine. But it's difficult for me to get too excited about anything else in the area because it's the same demographic picture as New England. But without the big names like Raytheon and Harvard and MIT. The Northeast and the Mid-Atlantic are really the only parts of the country that rely on Amtrak for anything. And so any money that goes into Amtrak is going to go into this zone. Makes sense. But everything else is spread among all 50 states, heavy on bridges, heavy on the interstates. That's going to go everywhere. So I broadly am in favor of infrastructure spending, but honestly, if all we're doing is catching up for the last 40 years of deferred maintenance, you're not talking about a big economic push here. $1 trillion of spending over a decade is not going to move the needle very much for a country with a GDP annually of 20 trillion. Well, those four states have nothing in common. So let's start with Florida.
Florida should be its own region. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, nobody builds anything in Florida. Nobody manufactures anything in Florida. So this deglobalization trend, Florida is just going to get passed by completely. That doesn't mean I think Florida is in a bad shape. It's still the retirement spot. And of the 75 million baby boomers, figure at least 25% of them are going to relocate. The single largest chunk of those are going to come to Florida. So if you know how to play those markets with that in mind, you're going to do great. Georgia and South Carolina, I like to consider as a unit with actually Alabama. These are the three states that are best in the country culturally for going out and getting foreign direct investment. And in a world where the global demography is tanking, but the American one is broadly stable,